Well, we have another one of these Ask Cecilia, Maggie, and Tim questions that I'm going to answer my part of, the Tim part of, in this video. But before we get to that, before I forget, I think this will be posted before it happens. Just a final reminder that I'm hosting a free group coaching session Monday, August 14th at 4 p.m. Eastern. Free group coaching session Monday, August 14th, 4 p.m. Eastern. I apologize if you watched this after that's already happened. If that's the case, you will be able to find a recording of it on my YouTube channel. But if you watched this before and would like to join the free group coaching session, you can sign up for my newsletter. I'll link to that below, and that will have, if you sign up for that, you'll get the Zoom link for the group coaching session. And if you're already part of my newsletter, you will get the link as well. So, in case you missed it, a couple weeks ago, I think it was, Maggie, and then we roped Cecilia in, and myself, we all answered the same question without knowing what the other two people's answers were going to be regarding like a manifesting question. And that's pretty much what this is. Again, this is my video for that. This is a little bit different in that the three of us had a brief text exchange about this before, not knowing it was going to be a video. Like brief, like we each said like 3 sentences about it. Basically just saying how tragic it was. But I mean, I think my answer is going to be a little bit colored by that, full disclosure. Just because Cecilia gave like a really succinct answer to this, and she'll probably talk more about that in her video. But yeah, this situation is like, the question is basically like, and we see this a lot. Like, this is something you see a lot in the Neville and Law of Assumption community. This is why we're answering it. Maggie got a comment a little while ago. Just a tragic event had happened in this woman's life, and she had tragically lost a loved one. And it was something recent that happened, and she was, seemingly in a state of despair, understandably, and incredibly traumatized by this tragic event. And being someone who knows about Neville, knows about the Law of Assumption, she was asking, like, why did this happen? Like, my life has been on a continual downward spiral since COVID started. And, like, the person that I was closest to, I just lost in this awful, tragic way. Did I create this? Did my thoughts create this in my reality? Like, did I create this happening? And, all three of us briefly, Cecilia for a long time, and Maggie for longer than I, were moderators of the Neville subreddit. And these kind of questions get asked a lot. And if you're getting into the Law of Assumption or into the Law of Assumption, they're good questions to ask because of what Neville talks about. And it's just, you hear stuff like this, and it's awful events, tragic events. And then the person who's into these Neville teachings so often blames themselves. They're like, did I create this? Neville says my thoughts create my own reality. A lot of LOA says that. Neville takes it to, you could kind of say, like an extreme, Like, did I create this? Did I create this loved one's death? Did I kill this person? Was this me? Was this my thinking? And that makes everything like so much worse. There's the initial horrific trauma from an event like this, but then thinking that you are to blame and that it's your fault that it happened, because your thinking creates what happens is like makes it exponentially worse. This is why I made that video, I think it was last week, around a week ago. I'll link to it above. Just talking about how like it's an insane delusion to want to be God and to create everything, to create your reality. This is a good example of why that is. Because shit happens in life. And awful shit can happen in life. Do you still want to be the creator of everything? Be God in that way, in that very limited way, in my opinion, when you think from that angle, when you interpret the law of assumption in such a way, when bad shit happens? Or you're just going to assume that nothing bad ever happens because you're God and you create reality? The law of assumption community, in my opinion, is an awful place to turn to when bad stuff happens in your life. Awful. Because it doesn't know how to show you any real support, at least most of the time. For the vast majority, 95, probably 98, 90% of people, it's not the right place to turn to. Occasionally, it can be the right place for some people who really resonate with it. But therapy, getting medical attention, getting counseling, it makes so much more sense for most people. The grieving process, the law of assumption just denies the grieving process, generally speaking. The human process of dealing with your emotions, the law of assumption community just, they don't even want to look at that. They don't want to look at that shadow part. This is tough stuff. You know, what I would tell this woman is that you didn't create it. And all that stuff's theoretical. That's what I believe, honestly. I never was one who read Neville's stuff and was like, oh yeah, he's right about everything. And like, you know, you create everything in your life through your awareness. Neville implied as much in some places, especially later on in his career, I guess. But I never saw eye to eye with Neville on a lot of stuff. I just loved the guy. I thought he had terrific advice to give, practical advice, a lot of practical advice. And I was able to discard the shitty, awful advice, which in my opinion this is, that you create everything. I was able to discard that quite easily because I knew that he meant well and was an open-hearted individual. If that idea that you create your reality, that you create people dying, you create people living, that you create everything, if that serves you well, I guess you can go with that. But for most people, it doesn't serve them well. And, in fairness to Neville, he spoke about all this stuff about awareness and what we're conscious of. He spoke about it eloquently and in a very deep, profound way where he had thought a lot about it for his entire adult life, basically. And it was his theory, that we're creating everything through previous thoughts and stuff like that. But in my opinion, that's all it is theory. And I don't agree with the theory. There's plenty of theories I don't agree with in the law of attraction. This is certainly one of them. I don't agree with it. I think it's nonsense. What I do agree with, and how unfortunately we do cause harm to loved ones, perhaps, is in how our behavior is towards them and what we're thinking about loved ones, what we're suggesting to loved ones, and then if they accept it. Without question, people that we're close to, like family, close friends, even work associates, people that we're intimate with, our thoughts affect their thoughts. I believe that for sure. And, Neville used to say, like, basically all these law of attraction teachers, and again, he might have changed his tune a little bit, at least later on in his career, like after The Promise, because in the 60s he talks about this stuff a little bit differently. It can be interpreted differently. But at least early in his career in the 40s and in the 50s, he said, you have so much more power than any other individual in regards to your life. Even if someone could affect you, your imagination can override it. And that's sound LOA advice. I mean, that's what you see a lot of these LOA teachers saying. Like, you have control. Like, you take the harness for, what's happening in your life. You can't let other people's suggestions control you. Now, when it comes to family, like if you're raising children, for instance, you are suggesting things to your kids directly and often indirectly through your own behavior the whole time they're growing up. And then when they are adults, you're still suggesting stuff to them. And same goes with, like, your spouse or any close friend that you see all the time, or, your mother or father or your brothers or sisters. What are you suggesting? Are you suggesting good things? Are you following the golden rule? If we look at our behavior, I think we'll notice that a lot of the time we're suggesting overly negative things to loved ones. And if we keep on doing that, they are more and more likely to accept those suggestions if they love us and if they have an open ear. Especially kids. For the way we raise our children, shapes what they accept. It's kind of like in the last videos that Maggie, Cecilia, and I did. We were just talking about, they were mainly talking about, like, how, the things that when we're young that we see, we accept them, and we accept strange things. So it's not just like what you say to your kid, but it's also like, all right, I'm going to let them watch this Disney movie, and they're going to get really into Disney, and you don't consciously decide this, really. It just happens. And then they get into these narratives of different movies they watch, and they accept some of those ideas too. So, but here's the thing, like, you allowed them, let's say, to, like, watch a Disney movie, right? But you weren't the one directly making them accept everything in a Disney movie. That was their own imagination doing that. You understand? So this idea that, like, you directly affect somebody is not usually the case. It's much more subtle than that. There's a lot more nuances to that and gradations of it, especially when it comes to family. But without question, our behavior and what we choose to expose family members to affects their behavior in some way, affects what they're suggesting to themselves and what they accept as true. Now, when somebody dies tragically, I don't know. I don't have a deep opinion on it. Like, it could be just some random, quote unquote, random thing, but I don't believe in total randomness anymore after getting into these ideas, And it's quite possible that when someone dies tragically, that there's some underlying reasons, some underlying beliefs or suggestions that are running on cycle and are deeply embedded in there that, at least in some small but significant way, can lead to tragedy. That's not to blame anybody. I'm just saying that some of this tragic stuff is embedded, and it's embedded deeply, and even if it doesn't express itself fully, if it's just in the background somewhere and other people don't even know that this person has those thoughts, even family members don't know that this person has this quote unquote dark side, right? Or these dark thoughts about, for instance, dying young or something like that. They're still there. They've been accepted, and they are more likely to happen if that's in the back of your mind than if you just don't have thoughts like that. I had a friend growing up who was like always had kind of like a dark personality, and was in a bad way, like in high school, like getting into drugs, just very disaffected, very smart kid, very smart, a nice person. Um, but anyway, he had all these personal issues, and then he really cleaned himself up in his 20s, and it seemed to an outsider like he had gotten his life together, and in his late 20s, one night, I don't know if he had a drink or two. He certainly wasn't drunk. He was walking home or walking back from a friend's house or from someplace, and I think he had his bike. He might have been walking across the street with his bike, or maybe he was biking across the street at a crosswalk, and somebody hit him and killed him. Now, was that because of his past cycles of beliefs and his thinking patterns that caused that triggered that in some way, even though he had cleaned up his life seemingly? And I really believe he did. I think most people believed he did. It really seemed like he had, in most outward ways you could see. Was that dark cycle he had earlier, was that a trigger for that seemingly random, horrific, traumatic, awful event? And if his parents had treated him differently, dealt with that darkness he had as a teenager, would things have changed? If they dealt with how he reacted to things when he was even younger, when he was like a preteen, would it have changed all that? I don't know. But this idea that it's your fault, or that you're creating reality, and that anything good that happens is you, anything bad that happens is you, literally, right? And that, like, it doesn't take into account the dynamic, ineffable quality of life, in my opinion. I never thought something as stupid as, like, you create everything because of your thoughts, until I encountered the law of attraction. But I was like, that just sounds like nonsense, because that was like the secret, watered down version, until, like, I encountered Neville, like, makes you consider it, because he's so eloquent and persuasive in his own way. But he didn't convince me, because I think that's a very negative way to look at life. And life is much better than that. Even amidst tragedy, it's better than that even. And this is, again, why, like, in a situation like that, besides turning to therapy and grief counseling and all of those good things and medical help, I'd be much more likely, as opposed to these law of attraction teachers and trying to manifest yourself out of this or whatever, I'd be much likely to turn to spiritual teachers as well as therapy and, medical help. Spiritual teachers like Byron Katie or Jan Fraser. I think I mentioned this recently. Like, I was reading Jan Fraser the other day, or last month or something, and I hadn't read it for a while, and I opened up to a page, and she said, "Don't," it was basically like, "Don't worry, bad things are going to happen. Don't worry, you're going to die. None of this. Oh, you create your own reality. Da 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 da." We can minimize the trauma and tragic events that happen in our life, I think, by following these LOA principles, law of assumption principles, and enacting them in our life as best we can. But again, I look at this from a practical angle. Advice from, like, Emile Coué at this point, or Maxwell Maltz, in terms of practically how to apply this stuff, resonates a lot more with me than, like, Neville's esoteric advice about how your thoughts create your own reality. I appreciate Neville for his more practical advice, but not for that esoteric stuff. So if you find yourself in a situation like this, get help and love yourself as best you can. If you have any questions, let me know. I can be reached at info@radicalcounselor.com. Thanks for watching.